can attenuate and agglomerate onto each other and form these amazing natural reef structures. They really become nature's wave attenuators. And they become the sort of bedrock of any harbor ecosystem. Many, many species depend on them. So we were inspired by the oyster, but I was also inspired by the life cycle of the oyster. It can move from a sort of a fertilized egg to a spat, which is when they're floating through the water and when they're ready to attach onto another oyster, to an adult male oyster or female oyster in a number of weeks. We reinterpreted this life cycle on the scale of our site and kind of took the Gowanus as sort of a giant oyster nursery, where oysters would be grown up in the Gowanus, then paraded down in their spat stage and seeded out on the Bay Ridge Reef. And so the kind of core idea here was to kind of hit the reset button and kind of regenerate an ecology over time that was regenerative and cleaning and productive. How does the reef work? Well, it's very, very simple. A kind of core concept here is that climate change isn't something that will the answers won't land down from the moon, and with a $20 billion price tag, we should simply start and get to work with what we have now and what's in front of us. So this image is simply showing it's a field of marine piles interconnected with this woven fuzzy rope. What is fuzzy rope, you ask? It's just that. It's this very inexpensive thing available practically at your hardware store, and it's very cheap. So we imagined that we would actually potentially even host a bake sale to start our new project. So in the studio, rather than drawing, we began to learn how to knit. The concept was to really knit this rope together and sort of develop this new soft infrastructure for the oysters to grow on. And you can see in this diagram how it grows over time from a sort of an infrastructural space into a sort of a new public urban space. And that grows over time dynamically with the threat of climate change. It also creates this incredibly interesting, I think, new amphibious public space where you can imagine working, you can imagine a sort of recreating in a new way. In the end, what we realized we were making was actually a new sort of blue-green watery park for the next watery century. An amphibious park, if you will, so get your TIVAs on. So you can imagine scuba diving here. This is an image of high school students, scuba divers that we worked with on our team. You can imagine all sort of new kind of manner of living with a new relationship with the water, and also kind of a hybridizing of recreational and science programs in terms of monitoring. Another new vocabulary word for the brave new world. This is the word FLUPSY. It's a short for a floating upwelling system. And this glorious, very readily available device is basically a floating raft with an oyster nursery below. So the water is churned through this raft. You can see the 8 chambers on the side host little baby oysters and essentially force feed them. So rather than having like 10 oysters, you have 10,000 oysters. And then those spat are then seeded. Here's the Gowanus future with the oyster rafts on the shorelines, the flupsification of the Gowanus, new word, and also showing oyster gardening for the community along its edges. And finally, how much fun it would be to watch the Flupsy parade and cheer on the oyster spats as they go down to the reef. I get asked 2 questions about this project. One is, why is it happening now? And the second one is, when can we eat the oysters? And the answer is, not yet. They're working. But we imagine with our calculations that by 2050, you might be able to sink your teeth into a Gowanus oyster. To conclude, this is just one cross-section of one piece of city, but my dream is, my hope is that when you sort of all go back to your own cities, that we can start to work together and collaborate on sort of remaking and reforming a new urban landscape towards a more sustainable, a more livable, and a more delicious future. Thank you.